Well, hello everyone, and it's actually a pleasure for me to be sitting in this little studio here this evening to share with you some of my experiences and where I am at the moment in relation to my association with the United Kingdom Independence Party. I'm not alone in this studio. This is not a one-man job here. There's a few people behind and off camera who may well interject at some point and just ask a question or two. Well, my name is David Hughes. I'm a leader of the United Kingdom Independence Party, UKIP for short, here from where we're broadcasting near to Bournemouth on the south coast of England. I joined UKIP sometime in 2002, recognising that it was a party campaigning for a cause that was very, very near to my heart. And that campaign is to withdraw the United Kingdom, Britain, from the European Union. For no other reason than to reverse what has been happening to us in this country, and that has been the removal of our sovereignty from where it belongs with the British people, their will being expressed through a parliament comprising of members who are elected by the British people. That sovereignty has been removed and sent to a growing institution in Europe known now as the European Union. Now, back in 2002 and before, the party was in relative obscurity. For many people, it was not a serious party even. It didn't get a great deal of attention in the media. But certainly in this last year or so, the profile of it has changed radically in the view of many people's eyes. I guess the main reason for that is an increasing awareness by the public, by the people, of exactly what they've let themselves in for in allowing our professional politicians over the last 20 years to give away our sovereignty to the unelected bureaucrats of the European Union. We read that in the last few weeks, the certain opinion polls have now put UKIP ahead of the Liberal Democrats, who are at the moment sharing in government as a coalition with the Conservative Party. That's an achievement that is a serious breakthrough for UKIP, and we are a serious threat now to the ruling party, the Conservative Party, and quite a number of long-time life supporters of the Conservative Party are beginning to discover a greater empathy in identity politically with all that we stand for. Now, if I can invite any guests in the room here with me to ask questions, I'd be glad to give an answer to them.
I think we ought to mention first perhaps about Nigel Farage, because of all of the UKIP, he's the one that stands out with everybody knows.
Yeah.
He's going truly international, isn't he? His YouTubes are being watched by the whole of Europe and beyond.
Yeah.
And I feel myself that he's bringing together all the people in Europe under one banner of out of EU.
Yeah, that's right. Nigel Farage is quite a charismatic sort of person. He's very clear in what he says, certainly very clear in what he believes. He was one of the first people of this party to make a breakthrough into the Parliament, into the European Parliament, or I think in the 2001 election. But his profile has gone up phenomenally in the eyes of the media, very much, of course, to do with the events when he gets up on his feet and speaks in the European Parliament, and he certainly gives the opposition their money's worth when he gets up to speak. There's no. In 1972, a radical change took place in the political life of this country, Britain. For in that year, our politicians of the day, in their debates and in their deliberations in Parliament, caused this country to join what was then known as the Common Market, or the EEC, the European Economic Community. It's transpired since that this was just the very early stages of a whole European project that would eventually develop into a virtual federation of Europe, a United States of Europe, which for many people at the time seemed quite a good idea. And perhaps going back a few years before 1972, many people, I think, were against such a project. But you see, such was the enthusiasm of world leaders and European leaders at that time. A massive propaganda campaign took place to persuade the people that to join this common market was a good idea. In fact, I can quote to you the words that were used once, either spoken or written, I'm not sure which, of one particular gentleman, a Frenchman, a professional financier and global banker by the name of Jean Monnet, who was a founding father of what is now the European Union. And he said way back in the early 1950s that Europe's nations should be guided towards the superstate without their people understanding what is happening. He went on to say that this could be accomplished in successive stages, each stage described as for having an economic purpose, but that will eventually and inevitably lead to federation. So I want to make clear to you the mindset that has been going on behind this project. A mindset of deceit, a mindset of manufactured propaganda to lead us down a road which, had we fully known what we were letting ourselves in for, it's a road down which I believe we would not have gone. But in those days it was seen as a very good idea. Britain itself was suffering post-war austerity still, and if one went to a country like Germany back in the 1960s, they seemed so much better off. I did a trip myself, I can remember, to Frankfurt in the very late 1960s, and everything out there seemed to be more efficient. It seemed to be wealthier, it seemed to be cleaner, better organised, and for purposes like that it would have appeared to be an attractive prospect. We could be prosperous together and powerful together on the world stage in a united Europe. But there had one problem, one serious flaw to this whole idea, and that flaw is that we had to surrender our sovereignty in this country in order for this thing to work. And I'm talking about the sovereignty of the people, the freedom of choice that we have as individuals to choose who is going to make our laws, when their time has come to go back to the country, to find out again if we can re-elect them, or if we haven't or don't like what they've been doing, we can get rid of them. In other words, we loan to our members of Parliament the sovereignty which is ours and belongs to us. We only lend it to them, we don't give it to them. And at the end of a parliament, they are under obligation to return back that sovereignty to the people, to the electorate, in order for them to make another choice. Well, you see, there's been one problem as the common market has developed, and that problem is every time a parliament has come to an end, that sovereignty has been returned with a little bit of it missing. In other words, we, the people of this country, have been losing step by step, salami sausage style as they say, chopped up step by step. Our sovereignty has been removed. And yet, amazingly, most of us were under the delusion that it was a good thing to surrender sovereignty in order to have a more prosperous future, a better future for our children, increased security, everything that should make us happier living in this country. And after a few years, I began to realise what a delusion this was. How on earth can we have a more prosperous future, greater security, greater prosperity, by giving away the power to make our own rules, our own laws in this country? We've actually given it away. Until we get to a point today where it's not an exaggeration at all to say that 75% now of our laws are made in the corridors of Brussels and Strasbourg, the European Union. Now, it's taken a time for people to realise what was happening. It took a long time for me to realise what was happening. And I think, like most of us, you know, we go through, we're very busy ourselves, we've got businesses to run, we have careers to pursue, we have families to raise, all this stuff going on. And basically, once we elect our politicians, we always kind of have a tendency, or I did anyway, to let them get on with what they've been appointed to do, and basically to trust them. I think what has happened in the last 10 years has seen a serious breakdown now of that trust. People are waking up to what has happened as they realise that things have changed terribly for the worse. The prosperity that we were promised is certainly not there. The security that we thought we might get in being part of such a large federation has not transpired. We live in fear of terrorism. And what else really can I say? The future for our children now, I think, is very bleak. We are shifting, we are moving towards the profile of a third world country. And you know, instead of Europe, a united Europe, being a powerhouse in the world, competing with superstate status, which was something that was always promised to us, Europe has been the economic basket case of the world. And we're witnessing over in the East the phenomenal growth of the new economies of China and India. And can you believe it? The Chinese are even bailing out the failing states of Europe in order to maintain a market for their own goods. What has happened to this wonderful project? My name is David Hughes, and I'm now a local leader in the town of Bournemouth, here on the south coast of England, and I joined UKIP in 2002. It was beginning to become well known. The party was founded just a little over 20 years ago. So I suppose I've been in it for about half its life. And even in 2002, it was still in relative obscurity. In 2001, there was a major breakthrough when three of our candidates for the European Parliament made it through for the first time electoral success, and we won 3 seats in the European Parliament, including the person who was a co-founder of the party and is now our present leader, Nigel Farage. We didn't get much media exposure in those days. I can remember, I think at the a couple of years after that, Michael Howard, the then leader of the Conservative Party, made some very disparaging remarks about UKIP, describing its members as gadflies and fruitcakes. Well, heck, we're not gadflies or fruitcakes anymore. The UK Independence Party is now making a significant breakthrough in its popularity. A very recent opinion poll put us on points just ahead of the Liberal Democrats, which is a party jointly ruling with the Conservative Party in a coalition in our government at the moment. At the last European elections, UKIP came second to the Conservative Party, beating the ruling party at the time, the Labour Party. These are significant breakthroughs. We've just recently had local elections in various parts of the country, giving us some electoral success. We could have wished or we could have hoped for more. But on a percentage basis, share of the poll, it's moved well into double figures, something pushing double that which it had been in earlier local elections. We have as yet to make a breakthrough into our own British Parliament at Westminster. We have representation in the House of Lords, some very good members there as well, doing a good job, but it's the House of Commons in which we have yet to make a breakthrough, and we are working hard towards that end. But what is our concern? Most of us we're not political politicians. We don't aspire to be political politicians. We're not looking for political careers. Although there's a growing youth element within the UK Independence Party, and we're encouraging them significantly. Most of us are sort of kind of a little bit on the older side and the retired side. But heck, that gives us one advantage. We're not looking to make careers. What we are doing is for the benefit of our next generations, our children, our grandchildren, to give them the prospect of a greater future than that which they can ever possibly have, locked in to a European Union which has fallen far short of all its aspirations that those who have pioneered this project would have hoped for. It's become an economic basket case in the world, and of course very prevalent in the news at the moment is the so-called Eurozone crisis. Just before I joined, there were terrific celebrations and rejoicings over the launch of the currency designated for the European Union, the euro. It was heralded as a great achievement to get this into place, and there were terrific celebrations. But even then, there were voices by experts, economic experts, who had looked at the whole thing and made it quite clear in their publications that it was doomed to failure. And they were written off. People making that opinion, with professional qualifications, were seen as killjoys. One of them was a former advisor to the Thatcher government, a person that was highly acclaimed by Margaret Thatcher herself for his expertise in the field of economics. Mentioned him in her own memoirs for the contribution he made. The name of Timothy Congdon, who is now well on side in the UK Independence Party. He was one of the voices that sounded a warning as to where Europe was going with this currency. And of course he, along with many others, could easily turn around now and say, "We told you so." But he's not actually said that. I don't think he would. But he has every right to do so. The EU project has hit the rocks. The vessel is sinking. It's costing this country a fortune to bail out the failing countries, particularly the Mediterranean countries that are failing terribly in their own economies, particularly Greece, which is prevalent in the news at the moment, and there is very little hope that they could survive inside this Eurozone. And should they exit the Eurozone, then of course it will cause some reverberations throughout Europe and the rest of the world, and there could well be more to follow. But, you know, let's get these things in perspective. Many, many people in this country are suffering economically because of the austerity packages that we have had to put into place to cut down public spending, because we simply are not able to spend again what we have been spending. And I think, if I remember rightly, this austerity package was going to cost us about £6.5 billion at present. That means there's less money for businesses to invest. It means cutting back on police. It means cutting back on public services. It means unemployment for our young people. It means failing businesses. It means cutting back on essential public services and jobs being lost there. And yet our commitment so far in bailout payments to aid the failing economies of the European Union, particularly through the International Monetary Fund, which actually was never established to bail out failing countries in this regard. We always principally thought that the IMF was there to help out third world nations in tropical areas in Africa and South America and places like that. Our commitment is near enough 40 billion. And that's what it's costing you and me, the taxpayer. So, heck friends, where is the prosperity that was promised? We're also finding, and our present government has discovered, that they no longer have the power to implement certain things that they took for granted. One example is the giving of the right to vote to prisoners. At the time this proposal came up, it came from the European Union. David Cameron, at the time this came up, was himself expressed serious displeasure at having to conform to this requirement. But you see, we elect them to make our laws, but our laws can be trumped in Europe. And this was by the Court of Human Rights, who declared that it would be unlawful to deprive prisoners of the right to have a vote. There is nothing that we can do about that. In fact, you can take many, many issues that affect you or affect this country that you can think of, put them into a search engine and attach the tag EU to it, and you will discover that much of that which we've been subjected to that we don't like has originated in the European Union. As I speak, we've had, during the month of March, one of the driest months on record for a long time. Our water authorities were talking about hosepipe bans, that there was a drought, there was going to be drastic water shortages, and we would all suffer as a result of that. And yet, you know, plans that earlier government had laid down in anticipation of water shortage as a result of increasing population had been foreseen, it had been planned, and provisions put into place to meet the need for increasing demand on water. And it's recently come out that our plans, or the British plans, to have 2 major reservoirs built, and would have been built by now, capable of meeting all our needs, drought or no drought, did not fit in with the plans that Brussels had in mind as far as this was concerned. So, my friends, this is something we can blame on them, because we don't have the right to govern ourselves in this country anymore. And I believe, with all those that are with me in this work, in this project, almost a mission you can call it, recognise that unless we get our sovereignty back, until we recover the right to govern ourselves, to put men and women into place to represent the interests of the people in this country for our future generations, unless that happens, I don't think we have much of a future for our children. And so, I mean, I would appeal to you to think seriously on these things. You know, you can quite easily check out our website, www.ukip.org, and there you can absorb quite an amount of information in much broader and much greater detail than that which I've just given you. There are many issues. We don't just stand, though, as a party for restoring governance back to the British people. That is our raison d'etre, that's the reason we exist, but it now has a quite broad-based manifesto. And I think that manifesto is the envy of other parties. Some people might call elements of it populist. It always seems strange to me that if you come up with a good idea which meets with the aspirations of many people, our opposition just put a label on it and say, oh, that's populist. Well, if it's popular, why should it not be put into place? I think the problem is we get that accusation because those that throw that criticism at us know that as long as we are a part of the European Union, the sort of things we would see put into place would not be allowed. So they dismiss it as being populist. And I think secretly they would probably like to see it themselves, but they perhaps know that it cannot be done. Heck, friends, what I say, as far as we are concerned in this country, I say for every other nation state in Europe. I know that when the idea of a united Europe was first mooted, we'd had 2 terrible European and world wars, and nobody wants to be put through that again. Heaven forbid that anything like that should happen. I'm not so sure that the idea behind a European Union would necessarily prevent future conflict. I think we are just exposed to the risk of serious conflict, whether we are in this union or not. I think as far as Britain is concerned, we've always stood as a people, as a nation. We've stood for freedom. We have stood for internationalism. We've always been a very accommodating people and greatly interested in world trade. We've always been willing to help the weaker nation states, particularly in the third world, in sending out much aid, and we send out aid today, although I think it's quite often misplaced. But heck, what am I saying? I believe still in a world of nation states where people are free to elect those who are to lead them and to make their laws, to elect governments who are accountable to the people themselves. There should always be a concern by those in power that if they do that which is unpopular, they always stand the risk of being voted out. I think it's a principle that should remain for the world. But the direction that we're taking now is not going that way at all. And my fear is that if this project is not stopped, we are drifting towards a form of global totalitarianism, where power is being concentrated in the hands of fewer people who are unelected. They are unaccountable, may well be doing things that they think is in our best interest, but they're always a bit arrogant, you know. They always think that they know better what is good for us than we do ourselves. And we will see our freedoms go as we are seeing our freedoms go now. Friends, get on board with us. Because if you don't, I fear for our future.
Okay, David, as a UKIP member, I get a lot of questions fired at me, so I'm going to pass them on to you now.
Yeah, sure.
One of the most popular ones is Nigel Farage. I think most people know him because he's very high profile on YouTube. Does a brilliant job at fending off the European Union officials. But people are saying, why, if it's an anti-EU, get out of the EU party, are they then taking part in the European Union Parliament? Doesn't that contradict itself?
Well, actually, this was this has been a debate within the party and within various elements and factions of the party itself. I'd been to, you know, conferences in past times where this point has been raised. But look, let's get one thing right. Being in the European Parliament does not mean by any means whatsoever that you are in the European Union. Now, the European Parliament, I have to say, is a very different institution than our own Parliament, because our own Parliament makes law, as everyone knows, but through a very different process. It makes its laws through a process of debate, in both the chambers of Westminster, the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and no law becomes law until it's been thoroughly debated and discussed through all its various stages. But in the European Parliament, the members are more or less presented with a virtual fait accompli. The law has already been set out. They simply pass it by no more a sophisticated process than a show of hands, and if that is challenged, they may resort to pressing electronic buttons. It is not really a debating chamber. But as I said, being in the Parliament there does not mean that you are in the European Union. It is the most effective platform, in my opinion, to keep the powers that be of the European Union, the Commission, and its two or more presidents, which is another confusing thing about the constitution of the European Union, but it gives us the platform, the opportunity to call them to account. Now, the opportunities for, generally speaking, for members are very limited, but our party leader is in a position there to be given some few minutes to speak. Boy, when he speaks, he castigates this European leadership for what they are, what they've done, what they are going to do, and what the outcome will most likely be of what they are trying to do. He's effectively calling them to account. And of course you see that is being getting more and more exposure through this media, the YouTube. I'm speaking to people now who have no particular inclinations as far as UKIP is concerned, but they are beginning to take an interest in what is being said there. And the general vibes that I get is that they're very excited about what Nigel Farage himself says there. So it really is giving us terrific publicity as to what we're about, what we want to do, and where we are going. Now, if we weren't in there, that opportunity would be gone. It just wouldn't exist. Also, in past times, there have been quite vociferous demonstrations by our MEPs, together with MEPs of other countries who are identifying themselves with it on various issues in the past. Now, I know at an interview, in fact in a couple of interviews, but one with, Neil Andrews comes to mind, where Nigel was challenged with the view, well, look, he said to him, you seem to be UKIP persona. It's you we only seem to hear from, and so on and so forth. Well, I mean, Nigel's answered that one by pointing out that there are other quite capable national leaders in the UK Independence Party. But of course the reason, as far as I can see, that such an interviewer as Andrews has for having that view is really as a result of the media itself. They home in on Nigel for views and comments most of the time because he's media savvy, he's good on camera, far better than I am, and they naturally go to him for views and comments and so on and so forth. So really it's not so much Nigel projecting himself onto the world stage through that sort of profile and persona, but simply the fact of the matter is that with that exposure in the chamber of the European Parliament, the exposure from there to the rest of the world through YouTube has really elevated him to that kind of fame. So that's really the answer to that question, I think.
I noticed, though, that thinking about it, if it wasn't the UKIP members in the Parliament, it would be members from another party, one of the big parties, and they're all pro-EU. apart from
Are
a
we
very
talking about what you're
scattering.
talking about? Our own national parties, the Conservatives and Liberal
No,
Democrats?
in the European Parliament, where people are saying, oh, why the UKIP in the European Parliament when they're anti-EU? The point is that if they weren't there, that place would be filled by probably pro-EU members.
Well, yes, of
so,
course. I mean,
we are doing that.
Yeah, you know, I mean, this is the thing about a parliament. This is a principle of any parliament, and certainly of the British Parliament, going, you know, way back time immemorial. That a parliament is a talking shop.
You need an opposition, don't you?
It's a talking shop where there is open debate. It's deliberations that are not held in secret. They're open, and of course, it's inevitable that you would have a conflict of opinion. But if we haven't got this conflict of opinion in the process of making laws, we would never arrive at a law with which the general populace would be happy. You only get good law through open debate where the interests of all opinions, ideologies and parties are thrown into the ring. The various angles are discussed. There is bound to be opposition, but that's where good law comes from. If law comes from institutions where there's no debate, then you end up with a form of totalitarianism. If everybody in that chamber is of the same opinion, what point is there in having a chamber? There'd be no point in it. It would just be box ticking of what's put in front of them, and everybody would say, yes, we're up for that. It would be totally useless. Could never end in good law or good constitution. And that's for that reason then we should be in that chamber expressing our view. Unfortunately, the whole thing works in such a way that even if we're successful in stopping something that we don't like, heck, they just shelve it for a while until it's almost forgotten, and then they put it in again. And they'll do it again and again until they get what they want anyway. That is another reason that this institution is so damaging. It's the same with their referendums. They will never, ever, in any referendum, take no for an answer. All that they do is to turn round to that government and said, your people have come up with the wrong answer and you're going to have to do it all over again. And they'll keep doing it until they get the answer they want, or we will be stopped from having our referendum altogether, which is what has happened to us in the UK. They don't want us to have a referendum because they know full well where it's going to go. I've drifted off your question, but I'm just putting across to you the way that these people work. They just get their own way sooner or later anyway, but we're working hard to call them to an account.
That's a very valid point. I've just come to mind there, talking about the opposition in Parliament. One of Nigel's favourite sayings, that you can't get a what do you call it?
You can't get a cigarette paper between them.
That's right.
Yeah.
In our own Parliament, because
Yeah.
there's no real opposition. There may be 1, 2, 3 good men and true there trying to get their points across, but
Yeah.
there isn't an opposition. Yeah, they're all the same party.
There really is a couple of points. Listen, we've experienced in this country, as I think I might have said before, but certainly in the past 10 years or so, there's been in the general population a massive disaffection for our political class. And one of the typical things that they come up with is, they make promises but they never carry them out. They're all very appealing when they're campaigning, but once they get into Parliament, it doesn't seem to happen. well, a complete empathy with that view. That is what happens. But you see, the problem is here that our political leaders, our three main political parties, they are serving, or trying to serve, in my opinion, two masters. The first master is the electorate, the voting public, and appeal must be made to them in order to get into office, to get into power. But there is a second master, and that second master, or the influence of the second master, doesn't cut in until they are actually in power. And what second master am I talking about here? Well, I'm really talking about those global ideologues, the people with real global power, who have a centralizing agenda for greater power and for greater control in the world, and they're in positions to do that because they're running our banks, they're running the multinational corporations. They hold the purse strings of the global money supply. Now, once they get into power, they're the second masters that they have to serve, and in serving them, they find it ultimately very difficult to satisfy the electorate that put them there in the first place. And I think it's the Bible that says that you cannot serve two masters. You'll either love the one and hate the other, or vice versa. And so, I mean, this is just a personal opinion, but that is what I feel is happening, and why the electorate then feel so let down. But Nigel's right in what he says. You know, the ideological differences between the three parties is very, very small. I mean, go back a couple of generations and you had one principal party that represented business, that was mainly attracted to by the professional classes and the public school classes, the Conservative Party. And then you had the other major party, the Labour Party, which represented the interests of the working class, industrial workers, blue-collar workers, trade unions, and all that sort of stuff. And there really was an ideological divide. But nowadays, you see, and sort of saying that the Liberal Party was sort of floating somewhere between the two, and if people really wanted to be very middle of the road and moderate, they'd probably go for the Liberal Party. If they were in business, they went for the Conservative Party, and if they were a member of a trade industrial union, they'd vote Labour. The ideological differences were significant, but you see, they just don't exist anymore. I mean, in fact, the Labour Party, going back to the days of Hugh Gaitskell, were very, very much against going into the European Union. And that situation soon turned around when eventually Tony Blair appeared on the scene, who himself, back in the mid-80s, in one of his own speeches, long before he became a high-profile politician, he himself actually spoke against the common market, what is now the European Union. So, you know, yeah, ideologically, there really is very, very little difference, and it doesn't matter who's in power, the agenda would be pretty much the same anyway. Next question, if there is one, please.
Okay, I've noticed that media coverage over the years, we Brits tend to think of us as being isolated in our dissent of the EU. We tend to think that we're the very quiet rebels, and everybody else in the EU thinks it's a wonderful thing, all the people are thriving, and we're just being a nuisance. Now, what I've noticed with this high profile of Nigel again, he comments under his videos, comments under articles in newspapers about him, etc. They're coming from all the countries in Europe, even America, but they're coming from Poland, Czechoslovakia, Italy, you name it, you know. So do you think there's a swell of people in Europe now coming together?
I don't think we ever have been necessarily alone in where we stand and what we stand for in the European Union. I mean, one comment I distinctly remember was made by a former Polish leader, former president of Poland, Lech Walesa, who himself was quite a rebel against the ruling communist authorities. And when, I think, was it 2004, when certain Eastern European countries, including Poland, acceded to the European Union, the comment he made was, well, it looks like another USSR government again. So he was quite cynical on that particular point. But yeah, I think the situation you're putting to me is probably more narrow, more perceived than real. I mean, the real test in recent years for where other peoples of Europe stand is where they have had, unlike us, where they've had the opportunity to have a referendum on ratifying the most recent treaty, the Lisbon Treaty, which allowed a great further tranche of powers to go from the from the nation states to the European Union. I mean, our memories can be quite short, but remember the French had a chance to vote in the ratification of that treaty, which effectively was a constitutional treaty. It was to be it was to be the capstone treaty that would complete the project of the European Union, making it into an identifiable state, a homogeneous state across 27 existing members at the time, and the French said no. Then it was the time for the Dutch to have their vote. Lo and behold, they also said no. Now at that particular time, we, the United Kingdom, also were expecting the chance to have our referendum. It had been promised by Blair. He said that a referendum would be put into place, and up until the time the Dutch said no, we still thought we were going to get that vote, and it was denied us. It was said at the time that there was no point now in having that referendum because the EU were going to have to go back to the drawing board on this treaty, and so we were denied the chance, and we've been denied it ever since. But also the Irish constitutionally were obligated under the rules of their constitution to have a referendum, and they too said no. And certainly I'm quite sure that if a Europe-wide poll was taken between amongst all the 27 nation states, roughly 500 million people, I'm pretty sure that the European Union, from the people of Europe, would get the thumbs down. We are not at all on our own. In recent months, the Finnish People's Party, the nearest equivalent in Finland of our party, have achieved a great level of success in winning seats, I think, in their parliament. I'm not sure of the details, but they have certainly been moving forward. And do you remember the Czech president, who, giving a speech to the assembled members of the EU Parliament came out quite clearly in championing the cause of democracy and calling the European Union account for its so-called democratic deficit. And in response to that, many MEPs who were offended by what he was saying stood up and they walked out of the chamber. We are not alone at all, and certainly we have got a lot of friends abroad who feel exactly the same as we do, and more power to their elbow, so to speak, is what I say.
A lot of people say when I'm driving about in my bumper stickered car all over the place, being accosted in the car parks, don't we need to be in the EU for trade? What will happen to us and what will happen about the jobs?
I get that one quite a lot as well, and actually, interestingly, I find that it's one that pops up from the older generation, like myself, who were around, or perhaps even qualified to take part in the one referendum we did have back in 1975, and it was the trade card that was being pulled out in those days, that the great benefits of joining the common market would be the removal of tariff walls in Europe and opening up the continent to tariff-free trading, and that was the big idea that would increase the prosperity of this country. Some people, I can remember, of course, many people then were seriously concerned about the possibility of letting down our Commonwealth friends, and it certainly did hurt them. But you know, really, this was very, very much a part of the propaganda profile of that which was put to us. And so this is why I think the older generation are the ones that tend to bring this one up more than anybody else, because you see, if propaganda has been done well, it tends to stick in the mind, and it takes a lot more propaganda to remove it than the propaganda that put that thought in your mind in the first place. And it's a concern that people have shared. They rather think that the moment that we come out of the European Union, that suddenly we would be isolated, that we wouldn't be able to trade with them anymore. And they express this as a serious concern. But you know, the whole thing is a fallacy. Really, that just would not happen. Now, listen, we in all the years that we've been in this European project, from when we joined in 1972, every year since then, concerning our trade with Europe, with the exception of just 2 years in all that time, but all the other years, our trade with our EU partners has been in deficit. We've never come out with a surplus. And yet, compared to our trade with the rest of the world, we've always been in surplus. So the upshot of that really is that the trading nations of the European Union need us a lot more than we need them. I mean, can you think for a moment? You know, you're the boss of BMW, and the UK market is one of your biggest markets. They're dependent on selling cars to us for them to carry on with their projects. Now, do you think the boss of BMW cars is suddenly going to say, "Oh, sorry Britain, you're outside of the European Union now, you're on your own. Heck, I tell you what, they, by hook or by crook, will still come to us with their order books looking to do trade. And you know, before we were in the common market, we had free trade agreements through an organisation known as called the European Free Trade Association, which still exists. And there would be no difficulty, as far as I can see, in a trading relationship with our former EU partners being conducted through EFTA. I mean, you know, how does a country like Switzerland operate in their trade, who are actually outside of the European Union? They're not a member of the European Union, and yet per capita of population they export more into the European Union than we do. How do they do that? Well, they've made their own trade agreements and they're doing very well out of it. So look, this business of trade falling flat is a complete fallacy. The idea that's been put across to us that if we came out of the European Union we would lose 3 million jobs is another complete fallacy, because you see, those 3 million jobs are dependent on our trade with the European Union. But we're not going to lose that business. There's no way we would lose that business, so we're not going to lose 3 million jobs. They're in manufacturing of goods and services that will still go to those same countries, because, as I said, they need us more than we need them. Heck, we have a global market. We're global players when it comes to trade. We're experienced at it. We know what we're doing. And so, you know, this idea that we would lose the trade is a complete nonsense.
We hear that the 1954 under Wilson, the seeds of the European Union was when they brought out the Coal and Steel Act.
Yeah,
that's when they started removing our industries, our home industries, and sending them abroad.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of issues involved there. In fact, actually, the European Coal and Steel, I forget the full title of it now, European Coal and Steel Federation or something like that. That actually predates Harold Wilson. I mean, we're going back to the immediate the Treaty of Rome was in 1950, and that was really the founding treaty of what's become the European Union. And the project was always had involved nation states that were signing up to the treaty, acknowledging that there had to be some surrender of sovereign power in limited areas in order to achieve what they wanted to achieve. And there were two principal industries that are associated with the raw materials of making war. One is coal, certainly as it was back in the 1940s, and the other one, of course, was the byproduct of coal, the manufacture of steel. And the original parties that signed up, nations that signed up to this confederation, effectively pooled the governance of those entities, so that no one nation state had an overarching power in controlling of them, thereby, the idea being thereby depriving any single nation state, like Germany for example, ever again having the sort of power to wage war. That was the idea of it, but of course it was the embryonic form of what eventually became the European Union. What was actually really created was a supranational authority, not an international authority, not an agreement between the governing bodies of a few nation states, but the creation of a higher level of authority that owed no particular allegiance to any one particular party signing up to it. And it was to this higher level of authority that sovereignty was surrendered to, so that no one nation state had the sufficient power ever to make war again. I mean, it was all done with very good intents and purposes, but it brought into being a governing body, again, who were not elected by the people of those nation states. They had complete bureaucratic power and authority without really being accountable to the people whom they pretended to be serving. But you know, actually what really came from that principle was the power of this supranational authority to designate across the members involved, shall we say, a designation of particular industrial functions. For example, one of the founding principles of the European Union in its present form was known as the Common Agricultural Policy. And when Britain joined the common market, they really had to sign up to the provisions of the so-called CAP, Common Agricultural Policy. And it really meant a revolutionary change in our farming industry. Our farmers were no longer free to produce what they wanted to produce, and of course it was always the market, the trading market, that would dictate what farmers would produce and what areas of agriculture they would operate in. And of course they would always operate in a market that was good for their businesses. I mean, if there was if there was suddenly a great demand for cattle, there'd be more cattle farmers. If there was a shortage of wheat in the world and more wheat was needed, we'd have more arable farmers. In other words, we had the complete freedom prior to being a part of this project. We had the freedom to operate in a free and open market, meeting demand where demand was, and if it wasn't there, we would move on to other disciplines. Now, with the Common Agricultural Policy, we no longer had the freedom to do that anymore, because this was now being dictated to us by this higher authority who said, look, in Britain, we want you to do so and so and so and so, and that's the only area that you can operate, because when it comes to arable farming, well, that's going to go to another part of Europe. Yeah, the Common Agricultural Policy really meant that our farmers were not free to do what they wanted to do or what they felt they should be doing. They were now under constraints about which they could not do anything, because our own government couldn't make it any different for them, which meant, of course, that many aspects of our own agriculture went abroad, whether we liked it or not. That we can go back to the days where we were speaking of stockpiles of beef, or milk lakes and all sorts of things, butter mountains, simply because really this Common Agricultural Policy was really not working. And I can distinctly remember, we're going back about 20 plus years or now, and this was one of the first negative elements of this agricultural disaster that people, generally speaking, were becoming very aware of, and just wondered what on earth was going on. But you see, you've got the same thing with the Common Agricultural Fisheries Policy as well. Of course, Britain, an island nation surrounded by ocean and ancient traditions as far as the fishing industry is concerned, we were really experts in the ecology of the sea, and there was never At the time, there was never any fear of our waters being overfished. We knew how to manage the stocks of it well. Sadly, when we joined the common market, Ted Heath, the Prime Minister at the time, Conservative Prime Minister at the time, knew full well that the price, one of the prices we were going to have to pay was the surrender of our rights and our freedoms to fish in our own waters unmolested by other nations. We defended our waters, our fishing waters, vigorously, but we had to lose all that. And of course, with the bureaucrats running it, it wasn't lost long before our own fishing waters around this island became an ecological disaster, massively overfished, terribly poor management, and we were all the poorer for it. But heck, what am I really saying? What am I leading on to? Well, the powers that be that govern us, we don't always know who they are, exactly what they're planning, but we can certainly see the results of what they are doing. And I'm in no doubt whatsoever that there's been an overarching strategy to designate to various parts of the European continent certain industries and certain disciplines and certain services, so that one area of the EU would be majoring in one aspect of manufacturing, for example, and another part of Europe doing something else. And I think we're pretty used to the idea now in this country that we seem to be designated to be a financial services base, banking, insurance, pensions, financial management, all that sort of stuff is one of the big earners of this country. It's a good industry to have, and even that is, even the City of London is under threat even today through the desire by our European overlords to tax financial services, which may well result not in gaining revenue, but we could well lose much of that business that this country depends on abroad, because they will just pack their bags and go somewhere else where it's easier to run their businesses. But it seems to me that the underlying idea of this project is to remove from any single nation state the means to be independent. They are trying, I'm sure, to create an environment of interdependency so that we absolutely need each other for our own survival. And so the question is often raised, well, you know, if we were suddenly independent, could we get these things back? And I'm quite convinced that we could get these things back. The British people have always been a very innovative people. They've always been an enterprising people. I think by tradition we've always had a strong and powerful work ethic. And I'm quite sure that we would have the skills and the giftings and the talents to bring back to this country much of what we have lost. Right, okay, in the last recession, one or two more points were raised. I mean, I dare say that many of you good people out there looking at this are just not at all in empathy with what I'm saying at all. Well, you know, as I said, discussion, debate is always a good thing. You're perfectly free and entitled not to agree with me, but what I do say and what I do share with you, I genuinely really speak from, shall we say, my heart. One or two more points came up in the recession, which perhaps we could just look at right now.
Okay, there's a really good slogan that was out with UKIP years ago, and it was "Space, not race."
Yes.
And I think that was really telling of the actual problem that we have.
Yeah, space, not race.
Yes.
I mean, again, when I've gone out canvassing, you know, having stood as a candidate in a few elections now, including two general elections, we've some people who have taken some sort of a objection to us on a racial issue, thinking that our discomfiture with a too great a level of immigration has something to do with either a racial disposition on the negative side or some form of xenophobia, which of course it isn't. As I think I've said before, the British people traditionally are a very accommodating people, a very patient people, and we have a very open mind when it comes to the rest of the world. But what we never really asked for or voted in this country was, firstly, mass immigration. That seems to have taken a lot of us by surprise, and we can't really understand why our borders have been opened as wide as they have been in the past. And of course the allied issue that we never really voted for was multiculturalism. Now, when it comes to immigration, we should be open-minded as regards this subject, this topic, because there always have been industries and services in this country that have been well served by people coming into this country and taking up employment where employment has been available. People from other countries have certain skills and disciplines that we may be short of in this country, and frankly we need them to add to the prosperity and the well-being of this country. But at the end of the day, the peoples of this country, the government of this country, must be in a position to control it. People must come here with the necessary qualifications, with the sufficient means to certainly support themselves at their outset of the stay here. There should be some form of work permit situation, and the means for us to keep track of everybody that comes to this country, and be also open-minded to those that want to stay here. But of course always the logistics of all these things must be well catered for in order to maintain a wealthy and a happy balance. But in all honesty, since, shall we say, Labour came into power in the landslide of 1997, this really hasn't happened. It seemed, in retrospect, that it was a definite policy of the Labour Party to have a situation of mass immigration. Our borders have been opened up, and of course this has led to really too great a strain being put on the resources of this country to meet the needs of such an incoming population. Things are okay, of course, when the economy is expanding, when we're moving forward and there is plenty of work available. But that is not a consistent level at which we live at, as we well know now, where jobs are being lost, unemployment is increasing, and the strain on resources is becoming far too great. Now the whole problem of this was really exacerbated when in 2004 the membership of the European Union was opened up to incorporate half a dozen or so countries of the former Soviet bloc, Eastern Europe. And at the time, the government estimates of the number of people that would come over in the first year was something in the region of 13,000. The estimates were phenomenally way out it turned out to be something in excess of 100,000 people. It's an open border. Anybody from Warsaw or from Madrid or anywhere in the European Union is perfectly free to move into this country as if they were coming from Glasgow or Edinburgh. But the logistics of this is a nightmare, because where you have controlled immigration, you can plan for schooling, you can plan for healthcare and hospital provision, you can plan for roads. Can I even say, as I've mentioned before, you can even plan for the water needs of these people and the energy needs of a population, where you know and where you are in control of the people that are coming in. But if you don't know, if it's an open border, then of course our institutions of government cannot plan, and they can be so easily overwhelmed. I mean, even in Bournemouth here, there has been a significant increase in the demand for primary school places. You know, when you go back to the late 40s, early 1950s, before we had immigration on anything like a scale as we have it today, and I'm going back to the years of my own childhood. Now, there was what they used to call the bulge in the population occurring then. This is where the servicemen returning home from war were starting families, and in the few years that followed the end of the war, there was a bulge in the birth rate, and I myself am one of them. But you see, the authorities can plan, as they have done. They can plan for a change in population like that because they know what is happening and why it's happened. And that bulge is sort of, we're all coming up to retirement now, but you know, they could build schools, they could, and then when it came to hospital care and things like that, they knew where this bulge was going, and of course they were able to plan appropriately for the pension requirements of these people. They knew what was going to happen and can plan for it. The problem with the open border situation that we have now is that it's impossible to plan. You just don't know. And here in Bournemouth there's been quite a significant increase in the demand for primary school places. We have in this town a local authority by-election in one ward. We have a candidate there, and he was sharing with me the other day that there's a bit of an issue at one school where they have had to close the library. The school library has had to be closed in order to create more space for classrooms. So, you know, this has been a problem. It is nothing to do with race. We are not a racist party. We're not a sectarian party. We openly agree that immigration itself is not a bad thing, but it should be controlled by us, and that is the important element here, that we have control over what happens here. Even the matter that was mentioned earlier about water supplies. You know, the increase in this country as far as the supply of water is concerned, because we have quite a heavy rainfall, we are totally dependent on surface water. People in this country find it difficult to understand why, when we have so much rain, how come we seem to be so hard up for water, even though we're told that rainfall has dropped. Well, we can all say we haven't noticed that, but we have had a 15-20% increase in population over the certain period, but the provision of water has not been increase to cope with that increase in population, which is yet another reason why we are struggling now, or tending to struggle, with the prospect of water shortage.
Is that right, though, that in UKIP it's not a party of little Englanders, that you do have quite a variety of different nationalities and whatever? Isn't Nigel married to a German girl?
Yeah, that's right. I think one impression that I really sort of feel that I want to dispel here straight away, and I do find it a little bit annoying when the expression is used about us wanting to get out of Europe, you know, as though Europe is the problem and it's Europe that we want to get out of. Now, look, our problem is not with Europe, it's not with the people of Europe, it's not with the nation states of Europe. We want to be friends with them, we want to do business with them, we're happy to make treaties with them, we want to trade with them, we want to work with them, and for most of us we have a great love for Europe, for its culture, its holiday venues, its people. No, it's not Europe that is our problem. It's this project of the European Union that is really our problem. So when we say, or if the comment is ever made, oh, you're against Europe, or you have a problem with Europe, no, we do not. Using the term Europe is just really a shortened version of saying European Union. It is this project of the European Union with which we have the problem. We are not anti-Europe. I mean, as our leader Nigel Farage often says, in response to questions on this nature, he says, oh, well, I'm married to a German girl, so I mean, crumbs, you know, let's get this right. He can't have a problem there. And I have a great relationship with a few friends across Europe. I have a German colleague, a former colleague who was in this country for a long time. We had a great friendship going, and every few months he phones me up to see how, you know, I'm getting on and keep the friendship going. No, we don't have a problem with Europe. It is with the European Union. And as far as the composition, the personnel composition of the party itself, well, okay, you know, back 10, 15 years ago, it kind of did seem to comprise mainly older generation people who tended to be sort of, shall we say, middle class, or ex-professional people, or ex-business people. But I've been aware that in recent years the profile of the membership has enlarged considerably, not just in terms of, you know, income groups or varying social levels, but actually people of different nationalities who have made the UK their home, and they identify with us completely on what we stand for. I can remember back in the last general election, I can't remember his name, but we had an Asian gentleman who, like many of them, were running a post office business, a general provisions business. I think he originated from Pakistan. He was on board as a candidate. We had in the London mayoral elections, I think, going back to the previous one. No, I made a mistake there. No, we had in a leadership contest, our last leadership contest, we had this chap from London of Afro-Caribbean origin. No, it has quite a broad appeal in this respect. And another great thing is we are seeing more and more younger people coming in, people in their late teens, their early 20s. And as I go to conferences now, okay, 15 years ago it did all seem to be old fogies carrying their stuff in a plastic shopping bag, wearing tweed jackets and all that sort of thing. But hey, we see a lot of very enthusiastic young people now coming to the conferences, and it's a delight to see. I would do everything to encourage them. So we're not all old fogies.
Can I just say a little remark? Wonderful bumper sticker. I love bumper stickers. They give the message to so many people. Roger Helmer, who's just come on board with UKIP, hasn't he?
He has, yeah. Former Conservative member of the European Parliament, Roger Helmer, has defected over to the UK Independence Party.
He was giving out free a wonderful bumper sticker that said, "Love Europe, hate the EU."
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that sums it up. That sums it up in one phrase, and it just answers that. You're xenophobic, aren't you? All this sort of stuff. No, it's the political institution that's governing our lives that is our problem, not Europe.
And
or
their
the
own
states
government.
of Europe per se. Yeah.
And their own government.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there was some questions being raised about climate change or global warming. Over to you. Any particular aspect of it?
It's a very wide subject, isn't it, really, I think, and a lot of people don't understand how widespread it is. It goes right from, in effect, why we're not allowed to burn coal, to why we're having 4 or 5 dustbins shoved upon us for recycling. It touches every aspect of our lives in one way or another.
It does, yeah.
Yeah. What sort of, I don't know, what's UKIP's stand on that, really, or your own personal stand, whichever way you want to put it?
Yeah, well, of course, UKIP has a particular stance on it, and I have my own views on it as well, which are not necessarily inconsistent with the party manifesto. I mean, first of all, of course, the major area in which it affects most of us is on the subject of energy, and we have a very effective scientific or energy spokesman on the subject in the party. His name is Christopher Monckton, who's a very knowledgeable on the subject, and just put his name into a search engine, Christopher Monckton, and you'll get a lot of out. So I'm getting another question.
I'm just saying that's Lord Monckton.
Yeah,
that comes up on YouTube a lot.
It'll still
find him.
It'll still find him, whether it's Lord Christopher or just Christopher Monckton. It'll find him. I believe he was formerly an advisor to Mrs. Thatcher. I'm not sure on that one, but so don't quote me on it. But he certainly has a very, very good grasp of the subject. But look, where does it really affect us? It affects us in a couple of ways. Principally on the policy as far as energy is concerned. Now, here is another serious problem coming up for us in this country, and that's the future provision of our energy needs. Again, of course, with increasing population, that needs to be accommodated. Well, in the next few years, we have got some of our coal-fired power stations having to close. Their time has come to an end, and we cannot replace them with fossil fuel burning fuel for the supply of energy. Of course, the whether we go for nuclear or not is still another aspect that is very much in the melting pot. But again, you see, our hands are very much tied on this subject due to our being subject to alien government, shall we say, governance from abroad, and we are limited in what we can do. And what we have to do is to reduce our carbon output as a byproduct of burning fossil fuels, and to reach a certain target by the I'm not sure offhand which year it is now, but whatever it is, it's quite a difficult target to achieve. And in order to achieve it, we are obliged to use what is known as renewable energy. This is energy that comes neither from fossil fuel nor from nuclear fuel, but from the natural elements. So I'm talking here principally of wind turbines, wind farms, and of course a plan has to be laid down to utilise a certain percentage of our energy creation from these sources. The problem is these machines are very inefficient. They cost a lot to run. They don't always work when you need them to work. And it's adding a considerable amount to the electric bills for you and for me. We believe it's a disastrous road for us to go down. I think as party policy we have always favoured investment into nuclear energy and certainly into the more recent sciences of improvements in the safety of nuclear energy. And there is another abundant energy source that is coming to light in this country, and this is what's known as shale gas. We have resources in this country to be self-sufficient in natural gas for some 15 or so years. We have enough gas to repeat all over again the equivalent amount that we have been able to source from the North Sea. It's perhaps not a completely exact science how to extract shale gas at the moment. There's been some controversy over that, but heck, this is a way that we should be going down. As regards my own sort of view on the whole issue of climate change, global warming, you know, this was something that was brought to our attention a few years ago by a former Vice President of the United States, Al Gore. And you know, I'm very suspicious of the agenda that is really behind this scare, shall we say. And that's what it is. It's really a scare story. Why has it been foisted upon us? Because you see, the science of it has been seriously and academically challenged. Just a couple of years ago now, a kind of a scandal surfaced from the University of East Anglia, which is one of the principal global bases for research into this particular subject, and they were having to spice up their figures a little bit in order to keep the anxiety of this whole project going, which massively discredited their cause and called into question exactly the angle they were coming from. I think it was only a few days ago I read an extract from a newspaper which said something about the shrinking of the ice caps and the decrease in the population of the polar bears, and that within a certain number of years the whole of the sea ice in the northern hemisphere would almost have disappeared. Now the catch was the date that was on the paper for that extract, and it was actually dated some time in 1922. There is nothing new about this sort of a scare story. Nothing came of it from 1922. climate is always subject to a certain amount of change, and if you look at the figures that Lord Christopher Monckton is putting out, you would find that the figures are so relatively small as to make really no appreciable difference. But I'm a complete amateur on this, but I do ask myself the question, what is really behind this? And I have no doubt in my mind that it is all about the agenda of global control. I was just relating to our friends here in the recession when, years ago, when I was just a teenager, having a very rare philosophical chat with my dad, and we just happened to be talking about the prospect of any form of global unity, what would bring all nations together, as if that should be some sort of a benefit for everybody that lived on the planet. I mean, this predated all the talk about New World Order and loss of sovereignty and all the rest of it. We must have had it in the 1960s or something like that. And he came up actually with an interesting answer, a rather obvious answer, but an interesting answer. He said, well, I'll tell you, I know what would really bring all the nations of the world together, and that is if we had an extraterrestrial threat, if we had a threat of aliens invading the planet from way beyond this solar system. And I mean, I guess he would be right. You know, if we had an alien threat, then the governments of the world would have to get together and say, hey, we've got to work together to expel this threat. And it would be a fearful threat. The people would naturally be frightened at the prospect of what could happen to them. And haven't we seen this in science fiction movies, even in the last few years, the threat from outer space? And I was reflecting on that the other day, and I thought to myself, you know, I really wonder if the super elite of this world, the people that want to advance the agenda of centralised global government, if they put their heads together and said, I wonder what would really incentivise the people to look towards a global unity. What we really need is some sort of a global threat that would affect everybody on the planet. That would unite the people, because you see, they would be acting out of fear, as indeed we would be if there was an alien threat from outer space. And they've obviously come up with this idea of climate change and global warming and the demise of the planet if we don't all get together and do something about it. You know, nothing gels the mind of the peoples more than creating some sort of fear. And I really think that this philosophy has something to do with it. Now, I dare say a lot of you out there are saying, oh crumbs, do we have to listen to this? This guy's nuts. But I really think that this is more manufactured than it is reality, and it's all to do with the project not only of forcing the agenda of a global unity, but also exploiting the means to raise global taxation, because this is what it's really all about. Certainly the EU have wanted to exploit every possible opportunity of earning tax revenues from the peoples of Europe, and effectively the plan for a carbon tax, because of fear of global warming, is what is making us not happily, but parting up with our hard-earned money, contributing money into a pot to put down a fear that really never really existed in the first place. But that's a personal view. That's not a party idea. It's my personal view.
So for all the P's and Q's of the scientific side, check out Lord Christopher Monckton on YouTube?
Yeah, check out what he says. He certainly, to my mind, makes sense. I mean, I'm not a scientist. I've had I've had no scientific training, but he does put it over in a way that we can understand, and he challenges the status quo on this. You know, they speak loosely in terms of the scientific consensus, but hey, when you really dig into it, you find that the scientific consensus is a consensus of scientists that are actually getting grants for the work they do, and part of the qualifying principle of being awarded grants is that they are obligated to have a global change, a climate change, a global warming angle in the research they do. If they can prove that, they get money. So, you know, it's money that is really doing the talking, and it's your money and it's my money that's going into this pot. And I think it's a manufactured threat. Climate change has occurred throughout the centuries. I mean, we had a warming period back in Roman times. In fact, in Roman times, it was possible to grow vines, which now is only really practicable in warmer climes than what we have now. But you know, that's we've had periods of freezing temperature, and actually, as I understand it, that temperatures have not increased at all in the last 10 years. But I'm not the authority on the subject. You just Google Lord Christopher Monckton and you'll see some good YouTube presentations if you want to research the subject a bit more on the side that's sympathy with the angle that we ourselves are taking. Okay, we've just been talking, I had a further question here about shale gas and the fear and the concern that if we get the length of producing it in a great quantity, then it really would not be a resource that belonged to us, but that would be a universally owned resource or controlled resource throughout the European Union, which of course is true. I mean, I would say, thankfully, that this country did not go into the euro but retained the pound, which still gave us some measure of control over our resources. If we ever gave up the pound in this country and joined the euro currency, then for sure we would find that all our resources in this country would come under common ownership. We would have no necessarily have any right of access to these sort of resources just because it happens to be under English soil. The same goes, of course, for all our pension funding in this country. That would be shared with the rest of the European Union. Now, our concern would have to be that, assuming we could exploit this resource and have it in abundance, would it come under our governance as to how it's produced and the way it's produced? Well, even if we retain the pound, it's unlikely that we would have the freedom to govern that resource as we ourselves would wish to do. You know, I mean, look, our utility companies are all owned nowadays by foreign companies. We don't own them. They're owned by companies from abroad. And the same could also happen here, much to the detriment, I believe, of our own people. Same, listen, there's terrific concern about the so-called HS2 high-speed rail project. People that are being affected by it were saying, why do we need it? The countries can't really afford it. It's a very, very expensive project. If we got any investment to spare on that sort of a project, it should go into the existing rail system, which needs seriously updating. But what our government is reluctant to say is they've got to pursue this project because it's actually in an EU directive. It's all part of the pan-European transportation plan to have high-speed links between all the major towns and cities of the whole of Europe. We don't have a choice here again, but the government are always reluctant about attributing an obligation to this by the European Union. They just seem to want to protect them from any criticism.
I'm still getting people after all these years who are saying, what of Kilroy Silk? Isn't he part of your party? Can you please, for once and for all, lay the ghost?
Well, yes, if you go back to about 2004, of course, he was quite a high-profile public personality, particularly through his chat programmes that I thought were very good. I enjoyed watching them. He became quite friendly with Nigel Farage, our present leader, and certainly, politically speaking, Kilroy Silk was certainly on side with where we were coming from and what we stood for, and he was encouraged to join, which he did. And I mean, for the first time for a long time, suddenly UKIP had the focal attention of the media, and that's the great advantage in having a personality like him come on board. Immediately he more or less got a seat in the European Parliament, put up as a candidate. Of course, he was a natural for that because of his political experience and his high profile. But unfortunately, our ways parted a little bit there. I think he rather had aspirations and ambitions of instant leadership or something like that. But no, sadly, it didn't last. He retained his position, his seat in the Parliament, of course, until new elections came up in 2010, when he either lost it or he didn't stand again. So, and he's drifted into now obscurity. But he's not a member of the party now. He has no part or to play with us. Kilroy Silk, as far as we're concerned, is now history.
I've had a suggestion that would it not be a good idea, because the European Union is not a legitimate contract, that we can just say no today and just not play the game tomorrow, come straight out. They're not going to invade us. What are they going to do?
No, well, I take it when you say it's not a legitimate contract, there's been a very strong, not necessarily within UKIP itself, but there's been, in the last few years, there's been quite a strong degree of what you might call legal activity, where people who are quite expert in constitutional law, that actually our accession to the European Union in itself was unlawful because it breached existing constitutional law as regards the ability of anybody in Parliament having the actual power to give away our sovereignty. So this even now is being challenged. There's been a number of opinions, and there is a tendency drifting in favour of those that are challenging that particular view. But until anything like that transpires, the only realistic way we can come out, which is possible of course, the 1972 Act of Succession that took us in the first place can be repealed and we can just come out. But if we just turned on our heels and just walked away from it and said, well, what are you going to do about it? That's a hypothetical situation I really wouldn't quite have a job to answer. I don't think they'll be sending a gunboat over or sending the paramilitary police over here. I don't know what would happen, but at the moment our only real prospect is having a parliament with the will to repeal that act, and if they repeal that act, that is the end of it. In fact, there is in the Lisbon Treaty a provision to leave if you want to.
Thank you so much, David.
Okay, well,
It's been really
I'm done.
interesting, and I hope this has helped a lot of people out there in public land to understand a little more
Okay,
about
well,
what's happening
I'm
in
no
UKIP.
expert on it. I'm not a spokesman on behalf of the party, but I hope that which I've shared with you has been illuminating, and I hope I haven't offended anybody in anything that I've said. If I have, it is quite unintentional. I wish everybody the very best out there, and hey, give us your support if this session has been helpful to you in any way.
Thank you.
Thank you.